Just a couple housekeeping items as everybody is finding your seats. We're going to do very much similar methods for our question period, except that in this session we're going to be writing down questions and passing them to the outside where Robin or myself, Erin, will be collecting them, and then we'll be asking those questions of our speaker at the end. My name is Erin Garrick-Abadia, and I have the pleasure of sitting on the Education Committee here at IWCF. This is my second year sitting on the committee, and we're very excited to have some wonderful presenters with us this afternoon. Over the past year, IWCF chose the book Half the Sky, as many of you know, for our book club book. And our keynote speaker, Dr. Trent, is featured in that book. And one reoccurring theme that many people within the membership of our organization really wanted to learn a little bit more about was microfinance. And so as a committee, we were able to brainstorm some ideas, and there was a clear top candidate for our speaker today. I had the pleasure of meeting Mark about 4 months ago, and upon meeting him, we quickly realized that he was the top candidate, and we're really excited to be able to bring him here today to speak with us and give us a little bit more insight into microfinance and what exactly that means and how we can really start participating at that on an international and even potentially a local level here. Mark is the founder and CEO of Elevate, an innovative publishing company. He is a frequent public speaker, and he's a consultant to a diverse set of organizations. He's done extensive work in the areas of poverty, empowering micro-entrepreneurs through microfinance, and other economic initiatives. Mark is very, very well traveled. He has visited over 70 countries through his work. He has also lived in Russia, Chile, and Germany. He has an amazing family. He lives here in Boise, so we're very lucky that we have this gem right here in our community. He has a wife, Lori, and 2 children, Noah and Anastasia. He's got a fantastic record of education. He has a PhD in intercultural studies from Ashbury Theological Seminary, a Master of Divinity from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, and a Bachelor of Science in International Business from Auburn University. So as we're talking about education today, I think we can all feel very impressed with that record. I hope that you all help me in welcoming Mark. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It is a wonderful opportunity to be here with you guys. And Robin, if you could kind of just give me an indicator, like 30 minutes maybe, would be great. What I'd like to do basically is kind of just give a macro overview of microfinance. And one of my tendencies, I know, is to get too deep into the details. And so I'm going to try to not do that and save that for any questions you might have. So I do highly encourage you to take advantage of the questions, because I'm hoping to save a lot of time for that. Yes, and thank you for the intro, Erin. And I have had a lot of experience working in microfinance and in areas of poverty around the world. I spent about 15 years from 1994 to 2009 either living overseas or being very actively involved in overseas international initiatives in areas of poverty. I did hit to a point where my kids were in school, and we had to kind of make the decision whether we wanted to be an international family or a U.S.-based family. And then, you know, some of my travels became less fun as I was doing them by myself without my family. And so my kids love to talk about their travels. My son, who's 13, has been to about 30 countries. My daughter's been to about 25. So they're very well traveled, but that's just hard to keep up when they're in school. So we did, a few years ago, I started thinking through what some of our options and alternatives have been. And my wife had a long publishing background, and I had done some writing and publishing myself and sort of moved into the publishing world. So we founded this publishing company in 2008, which is Elevate Publishing. And in 2009, I more or less completely exited the microfinance space to dedicate myself to Elevate. So it's been a few years since I've been very, hands-on engaged on a day-by-day basis, but it has been a formative, significant part of my life, and it's a significant part of what I still do, even though it's not sort of a daily engaged sort of issue. So a little bit on our publishing company. If you ever want to write a book, come to me. I'm your person. We did start in a lot of ways because we saw this trend between print and digital and some of the internet capacities. So we really feel like we're sort of a cutting edge. I got a lot of these Gen Y, millennial, 20-somethings working with me right now, and they're working on all these different things. They got this one thing that's sort of what they consider an integration between the best of YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So we're going to be coming out with that, and we're going to call it UTwitface. Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's what's going to rocket me to media tycoon status. But no, in my previous life, when I was fully engaged in microfinance, I did have the opportunity to travel to a lot of countries. Some of them were very, very, very challenging locations, places like Afghanistan, Congo, Africa, places that were very dangerous. And I had several, actually. I had a handful of pretty difficult situations, a couple what I would call near-death experiences, which also led me to start reconsidering some of my life choices. But I would say that I haven't had any experience nearly as horrifying and traumatic as public speaking to a room full of women. So we'll see how this goes. So a little bit, just generally on microfinance, what I always call microfinance is banking for the poor. That's basically your one-sentence overview of what it is. And what that really means is it's offering or bringing financial services to people who do not have access to financial services through normal social and business structures. So they're people that are completely cut out of the financial service industry. So it's an intentional effort to bring those financial services to them. And there's three main categories for that would be borrowing money, providing a way for them to save money, and then a way for them to have insurance. So those are the sort of main drivers. And with microfinance, it has to be very unique because especially when it comes to borrowing money. If you want to borrow money, what do you need to have in order to borrow it? Yeah, you got to have, someone says you got to have money. It's kind of true. You got to have money. So there's a few issues that would based off of be your credit score. Are you credit reliable? What's your income consistently demonstrated over a period of time? And then 3, what's your collateral that you can offer up? So obviously in areas of poverty, they literally have none of those issues. They don't have credit score because they're probably not credit reliable, and they would, if they were, they would have no way to prove it. They have no sort of consistent income, salaried, employed type of position, and they obviously have no collateral to even bring to the table. So how in the world can you deliver financial services to people that don't have any of these issues? One way for people who aren't considered highly credit reliable, obviously in Western countries and even in developing countries, there are opportunities that are given to them through traditional financial services. But how do you think that is typically compensated for? Astronomically high interest fees or just payment fees or default fees, so it's a very heavy burden for people to carry if they're stuck in this sort of unfortunate financial position. So if the goal and intent of microfinance is genuinely to empower and help the poor get a hand up in life, you don't want to have those interest rate issues. This is challenged, though, in a large part because when you look at the magnitude of poverty and the amount of resources that need to be pumped in is very, very significant. So when people look at it, they go, we can't just offer the same services in the same way at a low interest rate because the microfinance as a whole would be continually burning through capital, which is fine, but it would be heavily subsidized through donations, which is also fine. But we all know that in a real sense, that's kind of a limited set of capital funds that can be utilized in order to reach the people that we want to help. So what I mean by that is most people who have their own sort of, if you look at societally, but even a personal basis, you have different allocations for your own funds. So you would probably have a certain percentage of money that you would mark for charitable donations. You'd have another mark that you would go toward, investments and then you have another that would go toward your own personal expenses. So there's an argument in the microfinance world is if we can find a way to access not only people's donated funds, but also some of their investment funds, we could significantly expand the amount of money that we would utilize to help the poor. So one of the key issues here is if we're going to access that extra set of funds, it has to be done in a way that generally doesn't burn the funds and actually has a way to replenish and keep the funds going. So in order to avoid a significantly high interest rate or other types of fees, what's the other option that could be done? Any ideas? Lowering the cost of the program on the enforcement or the dispersion of the funds. So there's two ways, is when you raise the amount of money or you just lower the amount of costs. So I had a friend who used to work in major banking and would do $100 million loans, and then went into microfinance, was literally doing $100 loans. And I remember she always said that essentially they were the same in the sense of the amount of workload it took to actually execute. So you can imagine on a $100 million loan what your margins would be compared to a $100 loan. So there had to be a way to create a system that could help us disperse $100 loans in such a way that wasn't burning through the money, but also wasn't burdening the poor with excessive fees. So this is really where I think one of the most, the genius of microfinance came within finding a solution to that challenge. And obviously it's not executed perfectly, but this is basically the solution. In most areas of poverty, they are very community-based people. So if you go to Africa or Asia, there is a much greater sense of community in the sense that people are more interrelated, interconnected, and interdependent with one another, and that their community is a very significant part of who they are. So imagine that in the U.S. terms, we tend to move a lot. People move and live in different cities and states and everything else. In lots of places in Africa, for example, moving from somewhere from the equivalent of moving from Meridian to Eagle would be a traumatic experience that they wouldn't want to do. And they actually wouldn't typically even do it. And a lot of that is because of some of the tribalism that even people in Eagle wouldn't really like people in Meridian, you know, and it could get pretty difficult. But the other issue is that they're just very tightly bound to their communities. That's just the way their culture works. So part of us is looking at that, how can we take a part of their culture that helps it to work? So the idea is basically this, is take the community and get the community to work on its own to find the people that are creditworthy and to enforce the loans. So that resulted in what is called community-based microfinance. So community-based microfinance works like this. We would set up a bank, and we would just call it a bank for lack of a better term. It could be also called a group, but you would say 50 people. So you come into a community and say, we're going to get 50 people organized, and each of those 50 are broken up into 10 groups of 5. So the group of 5 is the key group. So when you come in, we didn't, from the external, do the soliciting or the dispersion of the groups. What we said was to the community is, if you want a loan, you've got to come with 5 people total. So you and 4 other people, and you come and we will give you a loan. And then these are the terms of the loan, and they're typically very, by the way, very quick payback. So they're like 8 to 12 weeks, or sometimes up to 24 weeks is the longest. So the loans are sort of revolving sort of loans. And the side note on that is that's basically because when you're looking at microfinance world, we're not looking at trying to build up a capital-intensive business that will start producing profits in 3 years. It's more or less someone who comes to us and says, I can buy fish at the river and I can sell it in the market, but I can't get enough fish from the river to the market by myself. So what I need is something to carry it all in. Okay, well, we're going to give you $80 to buy something to carry it all in. So you're immediately taking more fish to the market and selling it, and that's how they're paying it off over 12, 16, 24 weeks, something like that. So you're thinking about something that's actually provides an immediate boost to their cash flow, and it can be paid off fairly quickly. So anyway, so then the group comes to us and they say, you got to have 4 people, or 5 people total, you and 4 other people. And the loan works like this. You're going to pay it off like this. And the loan is to the group. We do not make loans to the individual. So in other words, you have to pay this back as a group. And we have a loan meeting every week, or in some cases every other week. And you have to pay your interest back or your payment back that week, or you're in default. And it has to be payment as a whole. So what happens when someone finds out that they have immediate potential of getting a loan, but that they're also fully dependent upon 4 other people to help them to execute that loan? Who are the 4 people they go get? Yeah, they don't go get the wino, the village idiot. They go and get the people they trust the most, they know are the most reliable, and who they know well. So immediately you're starting to use the community itself to find the people who can deliver on this. And then the other issue that comes in, and this happens at almost every single group meeting, is people don't show up. So we'd go around, you got 10 people, 10 groups, and everyone's getting their payments. Well, then you get to one and they just don't, we don't have the money. When there's 4 of them there, the 5th one's not there. So then you sit there and they discuss for several minutes back and forth, what they're going to do. And almost eventually what happens is someone runs off, gets a little bit more money and brings it back and covers for that 5th person. Well, what happens immediately when the meeting's over? They go find the 5th person, right? Why didn't you show up? You didn't cover yourself. And then they would typically work with them on whatever the scenario is. And typically, they're obviously something came up, they weren't able to deliver and they're embarrassed, they didn't show up, or they were actually out trying to conduct business. So they say, okay, we covered you this week, but you got to cover us next week. And then if they had a particular issue, they start to help each other. So it's a way to bring the community to screen the people that you need, and 2, it's a way to structure it so that the community is forced to help other people within the community find solutions to their own situations in terms of poverty and business. So that right there is the real genius, and that was is most credited to a guy by the name of Muhammad Yunus, who has a thing by the Grameen Foundation, and they won the Nobel Peace Prize several years ago. And it was, obviously they executed that really well, but it was that sort of stroke of genius of figuring out how to lower the cost of the loan as well as mobilize the community so to be more effective. So the result is typically repayment on microfinance loans are in the 98 and up category % of repaid loans. They're almost always very consistently repaid. And that can be I think the most significant issue there is that you're structuring it in such a way that mobilizes the community to find the right people and police the loans themselves. One thing that's also very interesting to note, since you're all women, by the way, is that in all the microfinance programs that I worked in, the typical loan, women were typically 83 to 93% of the loan recipients. And what my primary job was for years was I wasn't ever really a financial guy. I was more of what we would consider the sort of external sort of soft qualitative benefits of the loan program, which would be the social impact upon the family, which would one of the most significant issues, which is the theme for the day, which would be education. So one of the things that I would do is I would set up strategies and a way of monitoring what the real impact of the loans would have upon the people who took the loans. Because one thing that we did see frequently is that people would be able to repay the loans, but it wouldn't necessarily bring them enough significant value that would benefit their family or their lives. So which is part of the reason why the interest rate issue is very significant. And I would say that there are financial institutions that came in that kept driving the interest rate up in the belief that they could access more capital if they could do that. And their argument would be, look, the repayment rate stays the same. So you got 20% interest rate, we bumped up to 25, you're still repaying, probably 30, you're still repaying, and then get up to someone would be up to like 100% interest rate. which is not quite as bad as it sounds because when you take in the inflation, but still it's enough to where they could repay it, but they wouldn't benefit it from it. So what we would do is try to monitor the fact that they were genuinely benefiting from it. So we set up a strategy and we set up a way of tracking that to measure it. And as we did that, we saw more and more and more that we were way better if we loaned to women rather than to men. And the reason is because we would see where the money would go. Now, where would the money go if the men were the recipients? The two biggest buckets that you could say, which is very pervasive in the whole world, obviously, but obviously in the developing world, would be alcohol and gambling. And it would obviously usually be local, sort of chicken fights and that kind of stuff, but they would kind of go off and have these sort of men parties. And when you go to the women, it's almost 100%. The first thing they do with any benefit is get their kids into school. And education, though not expensive in the sense that we would think of as expensive, is typically very prohibitive for most people in poverty. So my church, by the way, has a program in Kenya, and the actual getting the kids to school with their uniforms and with their books and with one hot meal a day runs about $30 a month, which is $1 a day, which is typically the whole entire household income of some people. So that's very significant expense. But we would see over and over and over again that if it went to the women, the first recipient were the kids and getting them to school. So I do think that's a very significant consideration, and that could be something that would be sort of a good, useful mobilization for you guys. How am I looking on time? Total? No. Oh, okay, good. It's like, wow. Okay, so that's kind of the basic overview I want to do, and there's a couple of things I would just kind of, I mentioned that we would talk about is, one is, so how would this relate to a group of people here in Boise, Idaho, and what could literally and really be done on a practical level to maybe help move the needle a little bit on microfinance? So one is microfinance is hopelessly complex. It actually seems fairly straightforward and simple and pretty easy. And the one issue that I have dealt with over the years are a lot of groups who have tried to kind of do it on their own. So they would get a group, and we're going to, we're going down to Ecuador, and then, hey, we're going to get a group of people, and it never works. I mean, literally never works. And the problem is that what typically results is a whole lot of broken relationships. So from the earlier days, my sort of philosophy on this was, people are experimenting, they're exploring, kind of, I'm not going to try to stop them. But then as I saw this happening on such a repeated basis and saw so much of the challenges that some of the sort of novice approaches produced for the people who were trying to do a high-level professional job, I've realized the first thing we need to do is steer everyone away from that. And so not trying to do microfinance on your own is the first step. The second thing is that there is one platform, or it's a website, it's an organization, but it's called Kiva, K-I-V-A. And this is the single best tool, I believe, in the world to get people engaged in microfinance on sort of a small exploratory basis. Now what Kiva is, it was an organization that was started, and what they do is they match entrepreneurs with donors. And so you can go on their website and you look and you see exactly who your person is and exactly what you're giving to. And so you can do this on your own. It can be like $50, more, or you can get a group of people who could come in and say, hey, let's pool our resources and get maybe 10 entrepreneurs together. And the way Kiva works is they actually, you are actually making a loan. You are not donating. So in other words, that money, when it's repaid by the entrepreneur, can come back to you. So if you put in $1,000 in 6 months, it'd be a little bit like a CD. You can't liquidate and access it at any point, but you can when they have repaid the loan. You'll get a notice that your loan's been repaid, and if you wanted that $1,000 back, you could take it. Or you could keep it, send it straight back out to another entrepreneur, and then over time you could decide if you wanted to mark it as a donation to Kiva or not. So we did this with a group from our church where we did it was a couple $1,000s, and it kept growing and kept growing and growing. And at some point, of course, we just told Kiva to keep it because we didn't want to keep monitoring it. But if you want it back, you can get it back. So it's a very unique way. And one of the things that most people don't understand about Kiva is when Kiva is matching with these entrepreneurs, they are actually partnering with organizations who are the sort of professional organization that are monitoring and controlling the dispersion of the loans. And they have very good, proper criteria the organizations have to match. So in other words, what Kiva is doing is not sort of recklessly dumping funds out randomly around the developing world. They're going through a process of the most highly qualified organizations who would have access to that funds, give it immediately to their entrepreneur. So how this worked, for example, is many of the organizations I worked with would get a lot of money from Kiva. I mean, to the tune of, $1 million a month kind of money, which is a lot of entrepreneurs that you could take care of. And so what we would have is we'd have college interns who would write up all these profiles and post them. And then when the money came to the organization would then disperse it. And then they would get it back and they'd send it back to Kiva. So you'd have this it's a very professionally controlled environment that enables the donor to have a face-to-face touch with the entrepreneur. And you can do it at any different type of level of donation. So you can go as low as you can. So that is, I think, absolutely the best sort of way to get your feet wet and to sort of see what microfinance is all about. I did personally work with about 4 microfinance organizations, which I believe all are very, very credible, very professional. And if you were in the situation where you wanted to do a higher level of donation or gift into microfinance or investment, and when I say higher level, I'm thinking like $10,000 or more, I would direct you to one of those organizations because I think that'd be much better than, but if you're going from anywhere from sort of $50 to $10,000, I think Kiva is your best bet. And those organizations, if you're interested, would be World Vision, World Relief, Opportunity International, and Hope International. And Hope and Opportunity are both microfinance-only institutions, and World Relief and World Vision have multiple initiatives, but they also have very dedicated professional microfinance operations. Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's good for me. Yeah. I could, well, yeah. So the names I said were, and by the way, I just looked at this resource sheet. It has Kiva on here, which was printed out for you. But the other ones would be World Vision, World Relief, Opportunity International, and Hope International. And also, while you're writing, if you want, at any time, you can just email me, mark@elevatepub.com. And as much as I wish that pub stood for a pub, it actually stands for publishing. So it's elevatepub.com. And you can just, if you kind of, seriously, this crowd, I think for me, is small enough that I would welcome any sort of interaction. That's totally fine if you have questions or comment specifically on the sort of organizations.
So there's a couple to start off with, and then Aaron will bring most of those up here. Yeah.
Oh boy, wow, holy smackers. Okay, how can I invest in microfinance as part of my investment portfolio? Yeah, so this is a great question, and it hits exactly upon the issue I was talking about earlier, which is the tension between sort of the benevolent, charitable foundation of microfinance and the conflict with sort of capital market investment model. So the best way I could say it is that there, any sort of investment into microfinance, there are avenues for that, but I do think you have to look at it and say, I'm going to look at probably a lower return on investment on this because of the social good it's going to accomplish. And don't look at it as, I want to maximize my financial return of investment and do social good at the same time. Now, I think that is obviously like a whole nother sort of conversation, and I think there are a lot of business models that are set up that can do maximum financial return and social good at the same time. But I think with microfinance, you run into the most significant issue is the cost of the loans that can be repaid but don't benefit the poor in the way that you would want it to. Now, in saying that, other people would stand up here and say, we need to kind of get past that. We need to get to, let's do maximum financial return because we'll pump way more money into here. And yeah, there'll be some problems, but over time, it'll shake out in a more significant way. My general reason I don't think that's the right answer is because I saw over and over again in the microfinance world that as people's financial positions improved to a certain level and their businesses improved, the social corruption was so significant it would impede continual growth. So there are other issues that it's not just access to capital. It's the corruption that would prevent it from growing as far. So I think if we kind of focus on this lower, what we call bottom of the pyramid, and really get it there, you have a better return. So all that to say, there are socially driven investment vehicles for people who want to donate or want to invest and generally want a return on microfinance. And I actually don't have those with me right now. So actually that'd be a great question. If you really want a specific organization, the best thing you do is email me, whoever's question that was. One just sort of classic story that kind of popped in my head just now to just kind of illustrate the point of corruption is multiple times we would have people, and depending on the country, if they got to 10 employees or up to 50 employees, that range is sort of safe. But once you get to like 50 or so, without a doubt, you're going to start having significant government intervention, which is going to be bribes. And one country in particular, Congo, where I went, this is just to show you how rampant and crazy some of the government structures are there. There was a very area that was pretty successful in terms of small business growth, and it was doing pretty well, and it got a lot of very successful. So there's a whole bunch of different shops and kiosks, and business owners formed a row that were, and it was close to the airport to have better access to people coming and going, that kind of stuff. Well, at some point, the Congolese government was trying to do some shakedowns, and people were kind of resisting it, and there's a lot of tension there because the financial growth was impressive enough that they wanted to get a cut of it. So at one point, the government came in unannounced with bulldozers and bulldozed the entire area with people in buildings, like literally running out the door trying to get away. And they literally just went halfway down the buildings to kind of leave a mark. So the buildings were left half standing. So instead of bulldozing it completely, they bulldozed it in half. So that's just like an example of something that I literally physically saw with my own eyes, the aftermath of that. It's pretty pessimistic. Okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just going to answer the question about for investors. The top social investment notes, they're part of a nonprofit, and they've done a tremendous job over about 20 years of putting together a great option for investors to get microfinance, accelerating their portfolio, and they do due diligence in a very diversified way. Most brokers can access those notes. It's the Calvert Social Investment Notes.
Say the name again.
Calvert Social Investment Notes.
Calvert Social Investment.
Social investment is the best way to access microfinance as an investor in your investment portfolio. Most brokers will be able to access them. They're in the shop.
So you guys, there's about 3 questions that are sort of how it could be local. So we'll go to that local question, and then there's sort of some other questions that you've maybe touched on that are more still international.
Okay.
How does the chieftains get involved? Are there feet on the street? So we'll let him address the local ones and then address those.
Okay, yeah, so all these are basically, yeah, exactly. How do you get involved on a local basis? One is obviously microfinance in a developed country like the U.S. is significantly different looking than it would be in a poorer country. So micro is still kind of large in that sense. There is one guy, Ron Burning. Anyone know Ron? Yeah, who does that here mainly with immigrants and things, getting them started. They need some of the capital, whether it be for a kitchen, for a restaurant, or for sewing machines and things like that. He's the one that I know the best, that's actually the best connection. And what's the name of it? Okay. Okay.
He's speaking in March as well.
Well, there you go.
In 2015.
Come back in March. So he's the best local, I think, from what I know. So, next.
There's a specific question.
Oh, can you please tell us something about specific interest rates? Yeah, no, that's like sort of as I alluded to, that's a little bit of a loaded question because, the absolute best interest rates that you're going to get in microfinance world is around 20% of annual. And that is like bare bones, and that organization is probably burning through a lot of money to get it at 20. And that's mainly one of the significant issues, inflation, that when the loan is dispersed, that money is not worth as much as it even 4 months later. And it's the cost of everything. So we would always kind of look for stuff around 15 to 20 and try to keep it in that real range, but realistically it tended to always drift to about 20%, which again I know it sounds like a absolutely terrible credit card or something from U.S. standards, which does just show you though the cost of how cheap we have access to capital to in the U.S. compared to everywhere else. But you would get them from 20 on up. And, a couple of the things, there's a website I listed here, it's called mftransparency.org. One of the things, if you did start getting into this, is I would really rely upon that source because a lot of microfinance institutions realize that, one, they look bad in the eyes of West if they have interest rates much over 20%. So they have a lot of different ways that they kind of hide higher interest rates, which would be fees and stuff like that. So mftransparency.org is set up basically to make everything very realistic. So one of the things that we had, for example, on this would be we would go to people and we would say we would have what we would consider very open and transparent financing, but they would have other groups that wouldn't, and they'd always come to us and go, hey, we should go with them because they have as much, but they would have things like, balloon payments at the end, or the 20% was every week they are charged according to the initial loan disbursement as opposed to the remaining principal. So in other words, you're paid 20% every blah, 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 which adds up to, sometimes way over 100%. So as you kind of look into it, just kind of beware of that, but don't go looking for something that's going to be a 3% interest rate because it's just not going to be there, basically. Okay, yeah, we speak to the power of making loans rather than gifts. That's a good one. That's a great one. That's one of my favorites because I really do think, and this is back to the challenge where I said the people who actually went and kind of did microfinance on their own. One of the classic things that they would do is have sort of like a loan forgiveness party or something and turn the loan into a gift, which sounds very positive and charitable and helpful. But one of the real things that we figured out with loans are that, like everywhere else, one of the biggest challenges with the poor, and it's a challenge everywhere, but is financial management and personal financial management. And one of the things that's shown over and over and over again in research, everywhere you look, is gifts are consumed and loans produce growth. So that's your fundamental issue, which is that a gift would end up being consumed and not have much of a lifespan. But when you're trying to get kids into school where you need an annuity sort of over a long period of time, a loan empowers them to be in the position to utilize that for that sort of ongoing expense. So that's the most significant reason why you'd want to do a loan over a gift. The other thing is introducing gifts into the developing world introduces a lot of issues with how the gifts are dispersed and who the recipients are. So that if you get into programs where one person gets it, it's just, as you imagine, it produces jealousy and strife among the community. So the best thing with very tightly knit communities is to have a base thing that everyone can be privy to as long as they go by the rules of the stipulations of whatever it is. So any sort of community-based event, so there's a lot of organizations, Compassion International, World Vision, who have these child sponsorship programs, which are picking out, individual kids, but they have learned over time that they have to really say, we're going to develop community-based programs that all kids are recipients for, and you're donating for this child, but really that the benefits are spilling over to the community. So that's sort of individual versus community and consumption versus growth of the two, I think, significant issues.
So I'm going to kind of combine a couple questions. One question is, when you're getting in that group of maybe 5 individuals, how have you seen or how do organizations combat maybe like the one chief situation? There's one person who's very outspoken and who's kind of directing the entire group. And then what do those kind of feet on the street organizations look like that are helping to monitor that?
So the feet on the street organizations that are monitoring the sort of the loan disbursement, I guess. Well, one is, you always have chiefs. You always have chiefs. And that's one issue is, one of the things in terms of most of the programs I was in was that we would say, we're not getting into policing the situation. In other words, we have the rules defined from the outset, and then you're repaying those loans. So in other words, someone has got to cover this loan, and however you guys do it is sort of up to you guys. So it's forcing them to deal with their own situations and find their own solutions. So that if it's one person sort of running all over everybody, well then probably the next loan cycle, which again, these loan cycles are short, they're going to, if they want to, they're going to get rid of that person if they're not adding value to the experience. Well, as if the person is the driver, is adding value, well then they'll keep them. So it's a very short-term opportunity, but it really forces the community to find their own solutions. So that's one. The other thing is, who does the monitoring? So typically what we would do is you have a loan officer whose full-time job is to go around and hit these groups and collect the money. And it would, depending on the situation, probably be 2 of them for own financial controls. But so they would go and they come in and these meetings are like 2-hour meetings to, sometimes 4 hours. But they kind of act as best you could explain something like and the best ones at least, I would say, work something like a counselor or a chaplain to the group, if you will, so that they really got to know them, really got involved with their lives, but they were really, collecting the money and enforcing the rules. And it was always typically a local person who was maybe not from that actual community, but somewhere nearby. And so most of the programs I worked with were typically all national or indigenous led, and the boots on the ground were all locals and regionals, and then using foreigners sort of as support services, like I said, with interns for Kiva and things like that.
And I don't know if you can answer this one specifically because it is about Kiva, but just wondering, the question is Kiva an all-volunteer organization, or how do they pay for coordinating the donor or the loans?
That's a great one, actually. That's a good question. So Kiva is not volunteer. And so they have a lot, they have obviously a lot of expenses for this whole sort of ongoing implementation and a lot of staff. And, one of the things that was, just by the way, this Kiva came out of Silicon Valley, and it was all sort of Silicon Valley young sort of entrepreneur type people who started it. And so in the initial stages, one of the biggest questions of everyone in the microfinance world, which if you kind of compare the two worlds, so microfinance world typically came out of the nonprofit international development world. And so these people in general have a whole different sort of set of values and way they operate and think versus Silicon Valley, venture capital mindset, which is sort of what Kiva kind of had. So almost immediately they had a lot of this group, the nonprofit group, had big distrust of Kiva, as this was another sort of for-profit way to, extract money from the poor or something. That was sort of the idea. But what Kiva basically does is they give 100% of your money goes straight through. So how in the world they do that? One is they take, they got so much money coming through that they're actually able to utilize some of that funds with float for their own and take some of their own money out of that. And then they also go and get large foundations like the Gates Foundation, people like that, to pay for some of their overhead costs so they can maintain the 100% pass-through. Yeah, so that's basically how they do it.
I think we're out of questions on cards, but I think we have time for one or two more short, quick questions. So is there anybody else?
Yes, sir.
From a tax reporting standpoint, does an organization like you that issue out 1099 track the loans that go bust?
Well, if you, that's a good question, actually. I know that when you turn it in, you know, actually, now that I'm thinking about this, I don't know that I actually ever dealt with that myself. I know that I got a like a tax donation when I told them to keep my money and send me a thing. They did, but I'm not quite sure in terms of ongoing loans how that's handled. Yeah. Yes.
You might just want to mention about how you can give Kiva investments as a gift. I have nieces and nephews that are teenagers that have really enjoyed the process of investing in people.
So with that, you meant that you
I pay for it and I give, and they give the opportunity to invest.
and they allocated it to the entrepreneur that they wanted.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's worth mentioning right there. I hadn't actually, I don't know if I ever did that or not, but that's a really cool idea. So you give your grandkids or your kids or whoever a, you know, $100 loan for Christmas. Yeah.
I would just mention that it's taken us 45 minutes to understand this, and you really have to spend some time
Yeah.
with kids explaining it to.
Yes, ma'am.
Just as a follow-up to that, I'm from Iowa Falls, so I don't know everything that's happening in Boise. But we have a Beacon Fair. I don't know if any of you have done that. She set up a food thing, and all these organizations around Christmas time are at the Beacon Fair, and then you can come through and give a donation in some of these meetings. So like instead of giving my sister a Christmas present, I could say you were, you gave $25 to the Iowa Falls Public Library. And I don't know if you do that in Boise, but that's on a smaller scale.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Good. Awesome.
Any last questions? I think that's it. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep, and I believe that we're going to have a short break, and then we'll move into the main room, the ballroom for our keynote speaker and for lunch. So take your time in getting over there.